At 6:47 on a Tuesday morning, a single CLang sliced through suburbia and detonated a chain of disasters. A pair of bolt cutters bit my security chain, and the HOA president of Willowbrook, Bethany Kensington Wright, turned from neighborhood tyrant into federal felon in 30 seconds flat. She thought she was cleaning up an eyesore. She was actually prying open a government-issued Jeep packed with covert surveillance gear for an active cartel investigation. That wrong cut was a $2.3 million mistake, tampering with federal property, interfering with a narcotics task force, and obstructing an investigation. 8 years in federal prison would be the receipt, but on that morning, she only knew power. She smiled at order. She believed the rules bent for her. And she believed I couldn't fight back because I was thousands of miles away, deployed in a war she'd never have to see. My name is Marcus Tank Rodriguez. 3 months earlier, I'd inherited Grandma Rose's house, a beige box on a perfect street. Sprinklers hissed at dawn. Mulch glowed a fake, chemical green. On paper, it was safety. In reality, it was a paper-crowned kingdom, shiny, controlled, and starving for control. I'm an Army Reserve MP, newly assigned to a federal drug task force, the kind of unit that watches a quiet door until the right man walks out. I plan to rent the place, build equity, and honor Rose, the woman who raised me, who taught me the difference between righteous and reckless. Mijo, she'd say, stand up to bullies, but do it the right way. I kept that promise under heat and dust overseas. I didn't expect to keep it on a cul-de-sac where hedges are shaved to regulation height and humanity is shaved even shorter. Enter Bethany, 52 white Lexus, ruler in her purse to measure grass blades. 7 years as HOA president had turned her rules into weapons. Violations were not reminders, they were threats with letterhead. 2 weeks into my deployment, an email landed like shrapnel, unauthorized commercial vehicle storage. She tagged my government Jeep as a work rig and an eyesore. The decals said law enforcement. The stripes said federal. But to Bethany, community standards meant whatever served her mood. $50 per day, she wrote, until removal. My sister Maya, a middle school teacher with a backbone of steel, walked over with copies of my deployment orders and offered to tarp the Jeep. Bethany looked at her the way a queen looks at a servant who speaks without permission. Rules are rules, she said. If your brother can't comply, perhaps this neighborhood isn't for your family. The fear came next, not shouted but whispered. She can lean the house, Maya told me over a crackly call that smelled like diesel and dust. She says her husband sits on city council. She knows people. We started seeing the pattern. A Marine down the block ticketed for a loud motorcycle that hadn't moved in weeks. A Navy wife fined for unprofessional lawn decor because her kid loved garden gnomes. A young family cited for excessive noise when their newborn cried. Military households were the common target. But here's what Bethany didn't know. Buried in Grandma's original HOA paperwork was a line as clear as Sunrise government, emergency, military, and law enforcement vehicles were exempt. Exempt. She wasn't enforcing covenants. She was inventing them. Fear relies on silence. And silence was the one thing my job had taught me to break. The next salvo came wrapped in a registered letter stamped with urgency, like a red bruise. Emergency towing within 24 hours. It name-dropped health and safety and CC'd local police and her councilman husband, a cheap attempt to turn fiction into fact. Meanwhile, a tow truck began slow laps around Grandma's block, the driver eyeing the Jeep as if it were prey. That's when I stopped being a target and became a problem. I called JAG Judge Advocate General's Corps. Staff Sergeant Patricia Williams read the file, and her voice hardened. Rodriguez, this isn't an HOA tiff. It's attempted theft of federal property and interference with a federal task force. Most folks think the Service Members Civil Relief Act is just about rent and contracts. It also protects a deployed service member's property from harassment and unauthorized seizure. Add federal ownership of the vehicle and the situation jumped from petty to prosecutable in a heartbeat. Maya turned historian and detective in one breath. She sifted through years of brittle meeting minutes in Grandma's old binder, the paper gritty and yellowed, and found a 2019 letter from Bethany to the City Planning Commission. It argued against military housing assistance in Willowbrook because transient military populations don't maintain long-term investment standards. Stripped of the varnish, it said. Keep soldiers out to keep the brand exclusive. The more we pulled, the uglier it got. A playbook of intimidation, trumped-up fines, and private inspections for families with deployment orders. Maya organized the receipts, every letter, every voicemail, every threat, and she wasn't alone. The Hendersons, the Washingtons, the Johnsons, people who had kept quiet because quiet felt safer. Now they had a record. Now the facts had a spine. Bethany escalated, with heels clicking like a metronome of arrogance. She marched onto our property with a tape measure and a phone, photographing the Jeep from every angle like she'd discovered a crime scene, not committed one. Your brother's service doesn't excuse non-compliance, she told Maya, each syllable polished to a condescending shine. Perhaps your family should consider a neighborhood more appropriate for your lifestyle. That word lifestyle hung in the air like a slur. She thought intimidation would make us blink. She didn't understand the machine she had just nudged awake. I remotely armed the Jeep's security suite, GPS pings, perimeter logs, tamper alerts. In 72 hours, the system logged 17 trespasses by Bethany. 17. Time-stamped, geotagged, saved. When I briefed Captain Sarah Chen, my task force supervisor, she didn't raise her voice. She just asked, "How fast do you want this fixed?" Here's what fixed looks like when the federal government listens. JAG filed formal complaints with Base Command and the U.S. Attorney's Office. The task force's property officer certified the Jeep's inventory: encrypted radios, covert cameras, GPS trackers, $347,000 of gear tied to active warrants. We coordinated with local police, who suddenly realized they were one bad tow away from obstructing a federal operation. A federal liaison contacted the city about reports of targeted harassment against service members, and Williams drafted a letter that read like a thunderclap. Any attempt to move or tamper with the Jeep would trigger federal charges, including interference with a narcotics investigation. That letter went certified to Bethany, hand-delivered to the local precinct, and BCC'd to Carl's official city email. The tow truck stopped circling. For the first time, Willowbrook's queen realized the castle had doors other people could open. Then came the bolt cutters. Bethany didn't back down. She doubled down. At 6:47 a.m., she and a private contractor she'd authorized walked up my driveway. Camera on, gloves on, cutters up. Clang. The chain snapped, the lock fell, and the Jeep's tamper alarms screamed. The security system live-streamed to a federal server, logging faces, times, and movements. 2 minutes later, she pulled the driver door. That opened a second violation: unauthorized access to equipment marked United States Government. Within 5 minutes, the task force hotline lit up. Within 10, a marked unit rolled up with lights off and body cams on. Bethany tried the usual charm: misunderstanding, community safety, urgent remediation. The cams caught every word. The footage caught the decals. The chain on the driveway caught the light like a piece of evidence begging to be bagged. Here's where arrogance meets statute: obstruction of justice, theft or conversion of government property, unlawful interference with federal communications equipment, conspiracy, given the paid contractor and premeditated letter trail. And let's not forget the civil side: SCRA violations, housing discrimination, and breach of fiduciary duty as an HOA officer. When agents interviewed Bethany, she blamed ambiguous rules. We had the covenant clause, explicit exemptions for military, law enforcement, and emergency vehicles. She tried to shift it to aesthetics. We had letters weaponizing lifestyle and targeting deployments. She tried to call it admin error. We had 17 trespasses in 3 days logged down to the footstep. Facts don't shout, they stack. And when they're stacked high enough, even a queen can't see over them. The fallout arrived like a winter front. You notice the pressure drop, then everything hits at once. The HOA board called an emergency meeting. Homeowners who had been afraid to speak lined up with folders and shaking hands. Maya read the 2019 letter into the record. The Hendersons detailed phantom violations. The Washingtons described noise fines for a crying infant. Local reporters smelled blood and context. The city attorney, suddenly aware that Carl's emails were part of a federal case file, recused. A special meeting suspended Bethany as president, pending investigation. Meanwhile, the U.S. Attorney's Office filed charges built to last. 8 years is a long time to reflect on a Tuesday morning that felt righteous and turned criminal. It's longer when the evidence is your own signature, your own words, your own bolt cutters. People always ask what justice felt like in that moment. It wasn't fireworks, it was quiet. It was Grandma Rose's kitchen, the floorboards creaking, the smell of vanilla candles, Maya's hands steady around a mug. It was Jag emailing the settlement terms for the civil side. Public apology to targeted families, restitution of illegal fines, HOA policy overhaul monitored by an independent administrator, mandatory anti-discrimination training for all board members, and a consent decree that put teeth into every promise. It was the task force returning the Jeep to service, the chain replaced, the lock heavier, the mission moving forward. And it was me, tired but clear, remembering Rose's words. Stand up to bullies, but do it the right way. In Willowbrook, the right way was paperwork, patience, and pressure applied in exactly the right order. If you've ever been steamrolled by a clipboard and a smile, listen close. Rules aren't the problem. People who weaponize them are. Pull your covenants. Read the lines they hope you never find. Document everything. Fear thrives in whispered hallways. It dies under fluorescent lights and open mics. And if you're serving while fighting a second battle at home, know this. Laws exist to protect you, and there are professionals who wake up every day ready to swing them like a hammer. Bethany thought she owned a neighborhood. She learned she only rented power from the people she tried to silence. So tell me, what would you do if your Tuesday started with a single CLang and a promise to back down? Would you let it slide, or would you help me stack facts until the truth was too heavy to ignore? Bethany's next move wasn't leadership, it was desperation in a pantsuit. 3 days after I filed my JAG complaint, she unleashed ExecuSafe security like mall cops with a grudge. A white SUV started circling my grandmother's cul-de-sac. Security, screaming from the doors. 2 guards photographing my Jeep every hour as if it were a ticking bomb. But the camera flashes weren't the worst part. The whispers were. Maya called me from a dusty forward base, voice thin over a satellite line. Tank, they're telling everyone you're dangerous. Mrs. Patterson won't even look at me. Hearing my sister sob with the desert wind hissing through the phone lit something cold in my chest. They weren't enforcing standards, they were poisoning our name while I was 8,000 miles away. Audience, tell me, what would you do if your family's reputation was being shredded while you couldn't even get home to defend them? I had to counterpunch without overplaying my hand. During my next authorized call, I reached Captain Chen and laid it out. Private security was surveilling federal task force equipment parked on private property. Her answer cut through the noise. Rodriguez, if we hit back too hard, we prove their point. We need them to hang themselves. So, I turned to the one thing Bethany couldn't spin data. My Jeep's security suite makes most precincts look like pawn shops. Motion sensors, infrared, GPS, and auto capture for anyone within 15 feet. At 1:43 a.m., the footage hit like a plunge into ice water. Bethany, flashlight pressed to the glass, taking pictures of the dash and tugging the door handle. We routed the tape through channels Bethany didn't know existed. Captain Chen pinged the Federal Licensing Bureau that oversees private security. ExecuSafe's goons vanished before sunrise, badges and bravado evaporating at the first whiff of federal heat. But, cut off from muscle, Bethany didn't retreat, she scrambled. Police, fire, code enforcement, animal control. She spammed every switchboard with breathless emergencies about my abandoned military truck, inventing hazards and inventing authority. Congratulations, Madam President, you just generated a paper trail showing obsession with federal property. While she flooded the grid with fiction, we documented facts. Every call, every allegation, every timestamp. The war was escalating. I was still in a comms bunker staring at a satellite phone while my family took hits. Powerless? Not quite. Power that's patient is often deadlier. Then came the morning every narcissist writes into their own downfall. At 6:47 a.m. on Tuesday, Maya's security camera caught the soundtrack. Clang, 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 bolt cutters chewing through my chain. My phone buzzed me awake under canvas. Tank, Maya's voice trembled. She's cutting your locks. She brought a tow truck. She's stealing your Jeep right now. Through a shaky live stream, I watched Bethany, hair wild and bathrobe flapping, waving cash at Discount Dave's Towing. The driver took one look at the federal task force decals and backed his rig like he'd seen the Ark of the Covenant. Lady, that's government property. I ain't touching it, Bethany shrieked. It's abandoned. I'm the HOA president. And there it was, her own lips crafting Exhibit A for theft of federal property. Viewers, you ever witness a person narrate their own arrest warrant? I hit the emergency channel. Captain Chen didn't blink. Protocols for theft of federal law enforcement equipment spun up like a turbine alerts, dispatches, pings to interagency databases. Here's the part Bethany never understood. These vehicles are not just steel and paint, they're sensors with wheels, and they do not sleep. The cut chain triggered the kill switch cascade, cameras sprang awake, GPS drew a neon trail, and an automated alert sprinted through Homeland Security's backbone across 3 states. When the tow truck peeled out, Bethany improvised the dumbest plan in HOA history. She changed the community gate locks, trapping the Jeep inside and blocking law enforcement access. Bethany's response was to crank the sirens on her own downfall. More panic calls. She reported an armed militia, claimed explosive hazards, fabricated a code violation for unauthorized assemblies, and even sicked animal control on a neighbor's emotional support dog. Each lie stacked into something heavier: false reports about federal property, false statements about military personnel, interference with a lawful recovery. Meanwhile, the marshals rolled into Willowbrook Estates and hit the locked gate like a wall of common sense. Marshal Jennifer Torres stepped out, the kind of agent who's kicked in doors on cartel compounds and still remembers to say ma'am. She looked at the changed locks, then at the bathrobe monarch holding the keys. Ma'am, you've obstructed federal agents investigating the theft of government property. Open this gate now or face additional charges. The camera angle caught Bethany's face harden into pure entitlement. Then Bethany said the sentence that turned a neighborhood drama into a federal cautionary tale. I don't recognize federal authority over private HOA property. You have no jurisdiction here. She might as well have unfurled a banner. We declare independence from reality. Jurisdiction isn't a vibe, and the United States Marshals Service does not need a pool pass to recover stolen government equipment. The quiet after her declaration was the kind that ends careers. Bethany had chained herself to her own fantasy kingdom and handed the feds the padlock key. The marshals didn't raise their voices. They documented, they notified, and they prepared to proceed by the book. People think federal case means dramatic music. It really means paperwork you can't outrun. Here's how the hammer actually falls. The marshals initiated entry under authority to recover federal property, guided by the GPS beacons already singing the Jeep's location. As they moved, our evidence package midnight footage of Bethany probing the cabin, the guard's surveillance equipment confession, the 6:47 a.m., bolt cutter audio, the tow truck refusal, the changed locks, the on-scene refusal to comply crystallized into charges, theft of government property, interference with federal recovery, obstruction, false reports. If a prosecutor wakes up smiling, it's because a defendant narrated every element on camera. I'll tell you my answer. It was all 3, braided tight. Data that doesn't lie. Neighbors who decided decency is a team sport. And discipline, the kind that keeps a soldier from kicking down a door on a phone screen 8,000 miles away. Bethany thought power meant loud rules and louder threats. Real power showed up in measured voices, precise procedures, and a wall of veterans who refused to be baited. She wanted a spectacle. She got a record. She wanted control. She got consequences. And to anyone out there facing your own suburban autocrat, remember this playbook. Keep receipts, escalate smart, and let them talk themselves into court. Justice isn't fast, and it isn't flashy. But when it arrives, it's a clean snap, clang, 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 and the lock comes off. I hit U.S. soil 72 hours after the desert, still tasting grit and adrenaline, and walked into Grandma Rosa's kitchen expecting vanilla candles and warm tortillas. Instead, the air was thick with panic and printer ink. "Tank, you need to see this before the feds show," Maya said, hands trembling as she spread a paper avalanche across the dining table. Quick question for everyone listening. Have you ever smelled fear baked into drywall? That's what it was, months of harassment soaked into a family home. In those manila folders, 5 years of HOA, ledgers, minutes, emails, then the bomb. A contract between Kensington Urban Holdings and Eastbrook Development dated 6 months before I inherited this house. Subject line, cold as a scalpel. Willowbrook Estates acquisition strategy. Phase 2. They weren't policing lawns, they were clearing a battlefield. Maya didn't flinch. She'd gone from classroom calm to accidental detective, her teacher network turning into a freedom of information machine. She pointed to an appendix like a prosecutor. The personal gut punch landed last. Violation notices mailed to Grandma while she was in hospice. Maintenance failures, threats, deadlines she couldn't meet because she couldn't stand. The nurse said her blood pressure spiked at every envelope. I used to think her last words, "Mijo, don't let them take our home," were morphine dreams. Now I heard them as marching orders. For anyone listening who's lost someone under paperwork pressure, you know this truth. Stress can be a weapon. In our case, it was pointed at a woman who raised half this block, and that turned a property fight into a promise I planned to keep. 48 hours later, Grandma's living room became a war room. The couch where she used to shout at telenovela villains became command center. Maya morphed again, no longer teacher, not just sister, now strategist. She coordinated veteran networks, neighbor watch teams, sympathetic reporters, and, yes, federal agents. Captain Chen arrived with 2 prosecutors, and the kind of quiet confidence that only shows up when the law has receipts. Assistant U.S. Attorney Rebecca Martinez surveyed the evidence flood and shook her head. "I've taken cartel cases with less paper. On the whiteboard, fraud, conspiracy, civil rights, elder abuse. Under RICO, this wasn't an HOA argument. It was organized crime with a cul-de-sac zip code. Our coalition looked like a neighborhood movie you'd actually want to see. Tom Henderson brought his Vietnam buddies and their insomnia-fueled patrol schedules. Mrs. Patterson, retired librarian with a camera lens like an eagle, produced time-stamped surveillance from her bay window. Maya's teacher union spun up media outreach with the precision of a newsroom. The story caught fire beyond our block. Military forums amplified it. A congressman's staff called. Civil rights attorneys flagged the discriminatory pattern against service families and the predatory pressure on seniors. Maya found insurance claims. Bethany filed for Jeep damage that never happened, another thread in the fraud weave. At an emergency meeting, residents elected Maya interim HOA president by acclamation. First act, immediate account freeze, document preservation orders, cooperation letters to federal authorities. Watching her take the gavel in the same room, Bethany used to terrorize parents over paint shades, felt like ice water poured on a fever. Calm, clinical, final. Desperation makes sloppy criminals. At 3:17 a.m., Maya's infrared camera caught a silhouette behind Grandma's shed, feeding HOA ledgers to a backyard bonfire. The ash drifted sweet and acrid through our window screens. On our encrypted channel, Maya whispered, "She's burning the books on our property." Federal teams had been patient. This handed them motive and obstruction on a silver platter. The sunrise delivered more tantrums. All 4 tires on Maya's car slashed. Military scum sprayed across the windshield. For anyone keeping score, That's witness intimidation, followed by a billboard confession. Captain Chen assigned protective details before coffee. We didn't flinch, we documented. The deeper we dug, the uglier Carl's fingerprints looked. Maya pulled city council audio where he leaned on the police chief to ignore complaints from military families. They bring instability, he said. Like people who move every few years to serve their country are the problem, not the bullies handing out fake fines. That recording became Exhibit A in the Civil Rights Conspiracy file. Then Bethany tried a shortcut. She approached Maya outside the grocery store with an envelope fat enough to choke a mailbox $50,000 to find somewhere more suitable. What she didn't know, federal ears were parked 10 yards away. Attempted witness bribery doesn't negotiate, it indicts. Her hubris metastasized. Through a private investigator, Bethany floated bribes at agents themselves, as if the federal government were just another HOA vendor. They declined, of course, and documented everything. Here's where the story pivots from revenge to restoration. With the board dissolved and accounts frozen, the prosecutors moved. Subpoenas rolled. Forensic accountants traced the embezzled funds. Veterans testified how they were targeted. Elder advocates walked the jury through what stress does to a body already fighting for breath. And me? I stood in Grandma's kitchen, now a staging area for repairs, and read her old recipe cards like pep talks. We patched fences, repainted trim, and replaced mailboxes that had become panic triggers. Willowbrook stopped being a place where letters meant dread and turned back into a neighborhood where mail could be birthday cards again. If you're here for the final punch, justice isn't flashy, it's thorough. RICO isn't a headline, it's paperwork, patterns, and patience. The charges, fraud, conspiracy, civil rights violations, elder abuse, obstruction, didn't shout. They stacked, methodically, until the weight became irresistible. Bethany learned that counterfeit power evaporates under real law. Carl learned that public office is not a shield, it's a magnifying glass. And I learned that grief can be a compass if you let it point you home. This stopped being about a Jeep the moment Grandma whispered, "Don't let them take our home." We didn't. We brought it back, and we left the porch light on for every family who needs a map out of the dark. Carl's allies scattered the moment the cameras turned their way. The mayor, who once bragged about partnerships with Carl, suddenly found a very interesting spot under the bus. City council members lined up to demand his resignation like it was a raffle prize. His company's stock didn't just dip, it fell through the floor 3 stories down and kept digging. Meanwhile, Maya started receiving death threats. Quick reality check for anyone listening. Threaten a witness in a federal case, and you don't get anonymous, you get a task force. Bethany's answer to that pressure? Filing false police reports that branded Maya unstable and claimed armed militias of military families were forming in quiet cul-de-sacs, not neighborhood drama. Bethany didn't stop at propaganda. She went full cloak and stumble. Private investigators tailing Maya, listening devices tucked into the seams of her car. That isn't nosy neighbor behavior, that's a 20-year problem under the Wiretap Act, with extra heat when the target is a federal witness. The case jumped from local scandal to national headline in a week. Reporters called. Networks lined up. Military Times put it on the front page. Carl, still clinging to his dignity like a life preserver, got served on live TV during a city council meeting. The PR firm poured gasoline on their own fire by publishing a community safety report stuffed with invented statistics about military families and crime. When your lies are engineered to incite discrimination against a protected group, you don't get clicks, you get civil rights prosecutors. By the time the Willowbrook Estates Community Center meeting was called, the building was bursting. Fire code didn't stand a chance. Federal agents lined the walls. News cameras blinked red in every corner. Military families from 3 states packed the aisle seats. A row of congressional reps waited, arms folded, jaws set. Bethany rolled up late in a white Lexus, stepping into a gauntlet of signs and veterans thanking Maya like she'd just come home from a tour. She swept in like a dethroned queen. Carl followed with the slumped posture of a man who finally understood that the back exit also has handcuffs. Friends, you ever watch a bully walk into a room that's no longer afraid? It's a beautiful kind of quiet. Maya took the mic. Not the shy teacher they tried to break the advocate they accidentally built. For 5 years, she said, voice steady, they used power to wage war on military families. They invented rules, bled budgets, and ran coordinated campaigns against their own neighbors. Then, federal prosecutor Rebecca Martinez stepped forward and read the case like a hammer recital. Federal property theft, civil rights violations, witness intimidation, embezzlement, obstruction. Each charge landed with that crisp courtroom finality. Tom Henderson spoke for the veterans, voice shaking with pride and rage. His son did 3 tours so people like Bethany couldn't profit from spitting on sacrifice. 18 months later, the sentencing read like a civics lesson with teeth. Bethany, 8 years, no parole, $647,000 in restitution. The judge's line would make casebooks. Your systematic harassment of military families is domestic terrorism disguised as community governance. Carl, 6 years and a lifetime ban from public office. His empire folded under $3.2 million in settlements. But here's the part spin doctors never understand justice scales. Maya was elected HOA president and wrote a new playbook. The Willowbrook Military Family Bill of Rights planted federal protections into neighborhood bylaws and dared anyone to challenge them. Bethany's house didn't go to market. It went to memory. Asset forfeiture. Bulldozed. In its place, Veteran Memorial Park. Swings where intimidation used to live. The ripple ran wider than our zip code. Maya left teaching and launched the Rodriguez Foundation for Military Family Rights, giving families a handbook and a hotline when HOAs go rogue. Our case turned into the prototype. Congress passed oversight with a name that still makes me grin, the Tank Rodriguez Act, because sometimes a nickname becomes a law when the fight is stubborn enough. Property values in Willowbrook climbed 31%. Turns out, stability appraises better than tyranny. The Rodriguez Military Scholarship Fund sent 23 kids to college on the money bullies once thought they'd keep. Tell me that isn't poetic math. We got a life too. Maya married Captain Chen's brother in a backyard ceremony where the vows nearly lost to the laughter. I stopped pretending I wasn't in love with Rebecca Martinez and married the woman who'd built a case brick by brick while I rebuilt a family room by room. Grandma's house became mission control clipboards, coffee, and a steady stream of families who needed a map through the maze. Every win went on the wall, every setback went on a whiteboard, and every time a new HOA tried the old tactics, they found a community smarter, louder, more prepared. On our first Freedom Day at the park where a mansion once stood, the sound carried. Children ran. Flags lifted in the easy wind. Veterans traded stories that didn't hurt to tell anymore. Maya read the Bill of Rights out loud while the crowd echoed the lines that mattered most. We didn't pretend the past hadn't happened. We did something better. We fenced it off and built a playground next door. If you're watching and you've got your own Willowbrook, hear this. Organize. Document. Don't flinch. The machinery of power counts on your silence. The moment you speak together, it misfires. And when it finally sputters out, you'll hear what we heard, the quiet hum of a neighborhood coming back to itself. If you want more stories where bullies get exposed and communities fight back, subscribe so you don't miss the next one.